Hello, everybody. Today I'm here with Joelle Mitchell from Australia. As you can see in my window, it's night over here in Brazil, 10 p.m. or more. And she fortunately accepted my invitation. Thank you, Joelle, for joining us for today's video. The idea is going deeper in the psychological world related to safety. I want you please to introduce yourself for our audience and talk a little bit on how you started doing this amazing job that you've been doing with helping me and my colleagues in the safety field to be better.
Thank you, Hugo, and thank you for having me on. It's lovely to be able to chat with you, and thanks for having a bit of a late night to fit in with the the big time difference here in Perth in Western Australia. So I'm an organisational psychologist, and that means that I've done a general undergraduate degree in psychology, and then I do a master's qualification specialising in organisational psychology. And then in Australia, we do a further what's called a registrar program, where you have a sort of specialised supervised practice for a couple of years, and then you become endorsed as an organisational psychologist by the regulation or registration agency in Australia. So in Australia, the term psychologist is protected by law. So you need to meet certain criteria to be able to call yourself a psychologist, and the same for those specialist areas like organisational psychology or clinical psychology, which is what people typically think of when they think of a psychologist. So an organisational psychologist looks at groups and sort of the way that groups interact within an organisational setting, and essentially looking at, how we apply psychological research in organisations to optimise different types of performance. So for me, that's about optimising safety outcomes in organisations for employees, and how we can actually use the psychological research and other research as well, and how we can apply that in organisations to achieve the best safety outcomes for people. So my career to get to where I am was a little bit of an unusual pathway, I suppose, but it's, I think, useful to share so that people know that there's, many roads lead to Rome, as they say. So I graduated with honours from my undergraduate degree, and unsurprisingly had quite a difficult time finding anybody who wanted to employ somebody with an undergraduate degree and no real experience in the field anyway. So I ended up getting a job doing document control for an engineering and maintenance procurement type company. And they were working for an oil and gas producer here in Western Australia. Altogether, I was with that organisation for about 5 years, and I worked in a few different positions in that company, and ended up spending the last couple of years in the safety team I think my role was called behavioural safety advisor. So I did sort of varying things there, including implementing a safety culture survey within the organisation. I did some field work with the health and safety representatives. Sort of lots of different bits and pieces. And at that time, I decided to then pursue the master's in organisational psychology. So I did that part-time while I was working. Then I was consulting for a couple of years, and so that was with a safety psychology consulting firm, and that was really working a lot with mining companies in the Pilbara region of Western Australia, doing a lot of frontline coaching with the frontline leaders, behavioural safety observations, safety leadership training, that sort of thing. So it was very very field based, focused on that frontline interaction between leaders and their direct reports, and looking at how we can improve the way that leaders are communicating and engaging with their direct reports to improve safety outcomes for them. So after a couple of years there, I joined NOPSEMA, which is the regulator for the offshore petroleum industry, which is a Commonwealth agency here in Australia. So I was a human factors specialist at NOPSEMA. And in that role, I did a lot of advocacy type work. So I wrote a lot of papers about different areas of human factors for industry. So how industry can apply these different areas of human factors into their work. And I also did work internal to NOPSEMA to help the agency integrate human factors approaches into the way that they would do inspections. In probably the last 18 months, we had a much stronger focus on psychological health and safety and mental health. And that certainly came to a head last year as the mental health implications of the pandemic became more apparent. Here in Western Australia, a lot of the offshore workforce fly into Western Australia from other states. And our West Australian Premier introduced a hard border with other states to prevent COVID from entering the state. So this had a significant impact on those members of the offshore workforce who would fly in from other states in Western Australia in order to get to work. So they were experiencing a lot of really significant challenges in relation to the impact that was having on their home life, their mental health. So their organisations obviously want to continue producing, and there's an energy security component of that as well. So, you know, they sort of did, I suppose they did their best in the situation that presented itself, and some of them did better than others, as they all do. So, you know, they would do things like offer relocation packages, and they would, you know, offer to bring people over and pay for them to relocate, either temporarily or permanently. They could bring their families if they wanted to, all of that sort of thing. And some people would take that up, but you know, that's not an option that's available for everybody. You can't just necessarily pick up your entire family and move to a different state. You know, you've got lots of different considerations to take into account there. So, you know, while we had some people doing that with their families, we had other people who moved over temporarily without their families, and were literally, you know, sort of had spent 6 months and hadn't been able to go home to see their families. And we had other people who chose not to do that and chose to basically come into Western Australia and then do a 2-week isolation in Western Australia before they then went offshore and did their 2 or 3 week stint offshore. So, you know, you've sort of got 5 or 6 weeks that they're away from their family. And depending on the operator, some of that 2 weeks would actually come out of their R&R period as well. So it was, not a good situation for a lot of those workers from a mental health perspective. So we started working quite closely with some of the unions that represent the workers in the offshore industry, along with the peak industry body here in Australia, to try to develop some common practices and some approaches that industry could use sort of uniformly to try and address this issue. And so that, you know, that was still ongoing when I left. And after 9 years with NOPSEMA, I've joined People Diagnostics as the head of psychological health and safety. So I've been here for a little over a month. So I'm pretty new here. We've been doing lots of podcasts. So we do the Psych Health and Safety podcast, which is really about trying to help educate people on what we mean when we talk about psychological health and safety, and try to help organisations see it through a hazard identification and risk management framework. I think a lot of organisations think about employee mental health and they think that it's, you know, it's a really specialised field. They think about it from a disease recovery perspective and a clinical psychology perspective. But when we can start talking about it in the language of identifying workplace hazards and reducing risk, then that really changes the perspective that people have about psychological health and safety, and it helps them to see as organisations what are the preventative steps that they can actually put in place from things like a job design perspective that they do actually have control of. It's not just an individual and the stuff that they have to deal with in their home life, but there's lots that organisations can actually do to reduce the impact that their work is having on individuals. So that's really what we're aiming to do with the podcast. And then we've got the technology platform that's our, I guess, the main thing that we do at People Diagnostics, which is Flourish DX. And that's really designed to help organisations integrate this risk-based approach to psychological health and safety into their existing safety management system structures, so that it's not an add-on, it's not something that they have to remember to do. It's just part of the way that they do their business every day. And it's really helping them to address their OHS obligations as well, where we've got those general duties of care that are required by employers. So that was a fairly long-winded description of stuff, but that's
people need to know you. And just taking the path to ask you the first question, most of the small business and even the medium-sized business, I guess that only the bigger companies and industries have a psychologist in their role of professionals. Usually in the medium to the small business, this somehow is taken care of by the safety professional. I've been in this situation already, kind of situations where you need to investigate an accident, or in this COVID time, you need to try to understand how people is reacting working from home and working at the plant, being more exposed and everything. So what would be your advice for those companies that doesn't have this research? What would be your advice for those safety professionals where they can have the minimum idea on what to do, or where they can find any like relevant information to do a decent job considering their limitations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think safety professionals, what their job is to facilitate the process of hazard identification, risk management, and identifying control measures. And they do that by drawing in and consulting with the right people. So there's, ask the workforce. That's step one. And there's tools and surveys that are available for people to use. There's plenty of different psychosocial hazard identification tools out there. Obviously, we've got one within our platform, but there are free tools available as well. So within the Australian government, there's a People at Work survey that's recently been published. There's a Copenhagen, I can't remember the rest of the the rest of the name of it, but it's a Copenhagen psychosocial hazard something or other. So there's a number of different tools out there. But that's only one step of the process. You'll getting the workforce involved in identifying those hazard categories, I guess, that are the most significant to them. But then the next step is to actually talk to them, get them in a workshop or in a group to actually talk about what do we mean when we're saying that we've got a lot of workload, or we don't have enough autonomy or something like that. We need to actually talk to them and ask them more about that. What are the significant impacts on workload for this particular work group? And by understanding actually what are the elements of work that are impacting most significantly on something like workload, then that leads us to identify solutions that are going to be more useful, rather than giving people something like time management training, which isn't really all that helpful. Well, yeah, okay, I can manage my time, but I've still got more work to do than hours available to do it. So time management isn't actually really going to be helpful there. What I need you to actually do as my employer is to reassign my priorities. If there's a particular aspect of work that's, that I'm needing to do a lot of rework on, or that it's, it's causing me an unnecessary volume of really shallow work, I need you as my employer to either take that away from me or introduce a different work process so that I'm not having to spend as much time doing this, largely unnecessary or less important work, so that I can focus on the work that's actually valuable and important and what I'm really here to do. So once we can actually drill down into what are those real causes of distress for people at work, then that leads us to coming up with solutions that are actually targeted. So you're going to get a much better return on whatever you put into it, whether it's effort, whether it's money. And then it's a matter of drawing in the right professionals to help you implement those solutions. So a lot of the time it's potentially going to be your human resources people that you then collaborate with to say, right, this is a job design issue, and what can we do about this from a job design perspective? Do we need to give people better position descriptions that have greater clarity? Do we need to have more clearly defined boundaries of the work that people are required to do and the work that belongs to somebody else? Do we need to upskill our leaders in actually managing workload better within their team? All of these types of things are different options that you wouldn't necessarily associate with a mental health control measure, but they actually are, because they prevent exposure to those hazards.
Wow. Yeah, a lot of new stuff for us. Another question, Joelle, is now that most of the companies have the majority of their workforce working from home everywhere, mainly here in Brazil, as the pandemic is like in the worst situation since last March. And I pretty much spend most of my day on the phone calling to people and trying to see how they are, what they are feeling, and kind of putting my ears available to them. But I don't know if it's enough. So thinking as a safety professional again, how can we be more relevant, since we kind of lost our our guide that is going to the plant, try to see people over there, talking to them. Since they are gone, they are working from home, they are in their houses. And is there any symptom that we can identify that somebody is needing help that can be recognized from a call or a video conference or something like this?
Yeah, that's a tough question, and I think we're kind of learning as we go in this space a little bit, because yes, while we have had flexible work and telework available for people for a long time, it hasn't been done at this scale, and people have always had still the option to or the capacity to have social interaction outside of their work environment. So even if they were working alone from home, they still can go out on an evening and see their friends, and all of that kind of stuff that really we know are protective factors for mental health. So I think that there are a few things that come to mind for me when I'm thinking about telework in particular, and one of those is the bleeding of boundaries between work and home, and how easy it is to just keep working when you're at home and you're working at home, especially if you're in a business that's a global business that does have 24-hour work going, wherever you are in the globe, there's somebody doing some work somewhere. And, there is that real temptation and possibly even expectation that people are going to be responding to things like emails and phone calls at all times of the day and night. So I think one of the things that organizations can do is create not only permission, but an expectation that people will actually set their own boundaries around, this is my work time and this is my home time. And there might be flexibility about how they choose to structure their day. And that might be around, what works for them, where they've got, if they have young children at home and they need to be able to do some homeschooling or that sort of thing. But it's actually about having some structure to help them separate out their work time from their home time. I think that's really important, because that's a big contributor to, burnout and just overwhelm, that feeling that you always have to be connected and you always have to be switched on, and you need to be seen to be working and contributing, because you're not physically there in the office. So you need to sort of demonstrate by responding to emails and all of that sort of thing that, yes, I'm here and I'm working. But, presenteeism isn't necessarily productive or useful work. So giving people permission to have time that's their time and that's not work time, I think is a big step, and leaders need to demonstrate that themselves as well. So if you've got a leader who's sending you emails at 3 a.m, that's not setting a great example in having your own home life and having those boundaries. So from a leader's perspective, you need to do that leading by example and actually setting the standard and saying, yeah, this is my time now. And I expect that all of you will actually have your own time as well. So it might even be that you share a team calendar of when am I available and when am I not available, as an example, to set sort of expectations about what's reasonable and what's not. Zoom fatigue is another one. Where people, I think, we're potentially trying to overcompensate for the isolation by having lots and lots of video calls and Zoom meetings. And this is actually preventing people from being able to do their work. So they're always attending these Zoom meetings, and they're literally going from one to the other, to the other, to the other, and they're not having any time for processing in between. They're not having time for those informal chats with colleagues that are so fundamental to our ability to actually work effectively. Those sort of kitchen chats that we have where we catch up with our friends and colleagues about what it is that they're working on, and then you make those connections with, oh, well, I know this other person's working on something similar, and you can sort of start to help pull those disparate pieces of work actually together. But you're missing out on that when you're working from home, and especially when you're constantly having all of those formal meetings one after another. So really revisiting, I think, do we actually need to have this Zoom meeting? Do all of these people actually need to be in on it, or can we send out a summary of what was decided? Does it need to be a full hour, or can it be 20 minutes? And there's lots of different types of online collaboration tools that you can use that don't involve a camera in somebody's face with, any number of people who can potentially be staring at you and you don't know who it is. So yes, there's absolutely a time and a place for Zoom meetings, but I think they're probably being overused at the moment. And that would be my next suggestion, is to have a think about using those in a way that's, using them when they're needed, but not overusing them. And the other thing that I would suggest is, setting some time aside, booking some time in the calendar for an informal get together with your team, where you're not talking about work, you're just chatting and laughing, the way that you do in that sort of 5 or 10 minutes when you all, get up and have a cup of tea or whatever. So you're having like your virtual afternoon tea, your virtual smoko, whatever it is, where you're not really talking about work, but you're just chatting and you're maintaining those social relationships. You're having a laugh. That's such an important part of work, is just having a laugh with your friends at work. And that's, another big thing that I think a lot of the world is missing when they're working in isolation.
Wow, that was a lot of things that I was thinking about, but I never was able to put in words. So thank you so much. I think it's going to contribute a lot. And I have some experience on people telling me, friends from other companies and everything, saying that they are working for 16, 17 hours in a row, and they are like not safety enough for telling, refusing a meeting schedule, like because people can think that they are at home, they are not working, they are doing something different, things that you just mentioned. And also, we did something that I think is important. We asked for employees to lock the lunch time because we have an hour in Brazil for lunch. But people, as you said, if you are in a global company, the lunch time is different around the world. So we like asked people to block their lunch time in order to keep it as a lunch time in fact. And I also suggested them to lock in their schedule some time to work. As you said, you need time to process the information you are receiving. You need to write down stuff. You need to read. You need to think about your day and kind of make a call for somebody. But people just see it's empty in your schedule and they just schedule something with you like you were obligated to attend, and you can be in trouble and sometimes if you don't. So thank you for giving us a lot of good ideas on what to do and how to deal with this situation that is brand new for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Richard Clayton has a lot of information on this particular topic as well. So he did talk about this during an episode that we had with him, where he was talking about impression management. And what he recommended was putting a 4-hour block in your calendar for deep work. And he said that the productivity, block out a 4-hour, so like 7 till 11, for example. So you spend your morning just focused on deep work. You turn off your email, turn off your, Teams or whatever other internal messaging apps you've got, and you just dedicate that to focused work. And what you'll find is that will have a significant benefit on your productivity and also your stress levels, because you're actually able to really focus in, get in the zone, get into that sense of flow with your work, and you'll actually be able to achieve and deliver what it is that you need to deliver. So that's his recommended strategy.
Wow. So Joelle, another problem that we've been facing, at least here in Brazil, related to the mental health and everything, is during the after actually undesirable event like an accident or something. I wrote a paper. Unfortunately, this is in Portuguese, and I reevaluated an accident investigation in two different methodologies, one being the root cause analysis and the other the learning teams that everybody's using. For the new viewers are using the learning groups and everything. And the simple fact that we removed the direct boss of the victim or the people involved made them like talk much more and give much more information related to the event, how it really happened, and somehow it created the psychological safety for the opening and trust in the environment to make them speak up and help us to understand and to improve our barrier, our defenses. So how do you think that we can create this kind of situation, kind of environment without having an accident as the trigger? So because one friend just told me today, the safety field is getting old and old-fashioned because we just learn when something bad and big happens. So Is there an opportunity for us, I guess, to learn from normal work to regular days? And I want to hear your opinion on this, please.
Yeah, I think the learning from work as done is obviously a big talking point at the moment in the safety profession, and I think that that's definitely a useful approach for safety practitioners to take, and for that to be successful. Yes, you're right. It comes down to people feeling safe to be able to go about doing work the way that they normally do it. And if there's the safety guy there who's normally writing them up for, breaching their procedures, then that's, potentially going to be a challenge where you're potentially not actually going to be seeing work the way that it's normally done. And I think that, there is real value in us understanding the adaptations that people have to make when they're confronted with conflict in their different goals. So, we've got this productivity goal, but we've got this safety rule, but we know that there are a bunch of other barriers that are also in place to protect us. So maybe we can push into that safety boundary a little bit, and that will help us to meet this productivity goal. But when we've got so many barriers in place from a safety perspective, where we've got those layered defenses, it becomes that the system becomes really opaque. So people aren't able to see where there might already be weaknesses, where some of the upstream control measures may have already been breached or been weakened. So what might be a deviation that's completely normal and normally leads to success for them on that particular occasion, because of other decisions made by other people that they have no way of knowing about, that particular deviation that they make on that particular day results in an adverse outcome. And when we then go and investigate, we see, oh, well, you broke that particular rule, so that's why this happened, not understanding that that's actually just a normal part of work for this group of people, and how they actually, one of the approaches that they use to manage the goal conflicts that they're confronted with on a day-to-day basis. So I think one of the approaches that can be really useful is a debriefing type of an approach, where at the end of a job, you might get the team together and actually say, all right, well, what did we have to do? What concessions did we have to make, or what conflicts were we presented with where we had to find workarounds to be able to get the job done? So taking that more proactive approach, where we're not actually waiting for an accident to happen to tell us that there's that there are workarounds in place, but doing it at the end of each job and saying, all right, what were the workarounds that we needed to do in this situation? And then taking that back and looking at it in more detail. Okay, so what is this potentially going to be a problematic workaround, or is it something that we can actually start to say, yeah, this is how we need to do this in the future? Or looking at what are the goal conflicts that actually created the environment for this workaround to be required, and can we actually do something to address those goal conflicts? So I think that's quite a proactive approach that you can take in looking at work as done, but not as a way of just intervening and saying, no, that's not the way the procedure says to do it. Because if you've got people who are then just in a place where they've got two conflicting goals and they can't make a decision about which way they need to go, because we do have those irreconcilable goals sometimes, and we all, we've all been in situations where we've experienced that. So if we can create an environment where it's normal to have that kind of a debrief at the end of a job, and look for those opportunities to say, this was actually really an innovative solution that we came up with to resolve this problem, and then go back and look at it and say, is this something that we can then adopt as a as an acceptable work practice, or actually, no, this is really concerning because of all of these factors that maybe people were unaware of, but we need to do something to resolve that goal conflict so that this workaround is no longer required. So it's not just a matter of watching how the work's done, but it's a matter of then going back, looking at it from the broader system perspective, and then making some adjustments to other areas of the system.
Perfect. We just had the International Women's Day, and my final question is related to kind of equality or so. We unfortunately we have much more men in the safety professional, at least here. I don't know around the world, but I'm talking about Brazil. And I'm a civil engineer, and I'm coming from the civil work where there is a really not nice, let's put like this, environment for women. Even more if they are in a safety professional, because they need to do some, to give some bad news, to say no sometimes, and to kind of giving commands and he-oriented men. And most of them are not used to this at home or so. I know you are getting the point. So what should be your advice to them, even more now in this new view where we need to create psychological safety in the environment, give employees voice and everything, but it's even tougher in many cases for women. How can you, I would say, the women overcome this barrier of the prejudice and not equality environment and still do a good job?
Well, that's a really easy question for me to answer. Thank you, Hugo. I'll just solve everything in the next 3 minutes.
I'm a feminist, so I always talking about equality.
Yeah, no, look, and it's good that we're having those conversations. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy, and I don't live in Brazil. I don't have that lived experience of what it's like to be a woman in Brazil trying to work in this industry. I think that I suppose my advice to women in safety is that you don't necessarily have to try to be more masculine, if that makes sense. I think that the attributes that are traditionally associated with femininity, if I can put it that way, if that makes sense, and recognizing that both men and women can have those attributes, and the same with attributes that are more typically considered masculine. Women can also have those attributes, but I think take advantage of your strengths, whatever they might be. So if you're really good at consultation, if you're really good at listening to what people have got to say and doing that sort of reflective, active listening, if you're really good at helping to draw out and understand the problems that people are confronted with in the workforce, then that's something unique in your skill set and in your capability that you can bring to the picture. So instead of trying to push that aside and take on that really hyper masculine veneer, just don't buy into that. Don't do it. Put it to the side, challenge it. It's unnecessary. You can actually bring something unique and valuable to the organization by taking an approach of humble inquiry and working with the work groups to help them better define and understand the problems that they're facing, and helping them to develop and identify the solutions that they feel are going to be most appropriate for them. So don't go in trying to be the police. Don't go in trying to tell them how to do their job. Go in and ask them about their job and ask them what would help them to do their job better, what would help them to make their job safer for them. So take on that role of facilitator rather than the role of the police officer.
Yes, perfect. So we share this opinion, and I had a situation where I was identifying that one of the girls that worked with me was trying to be one of us, like looking more masculine, not in sexual way, but trying to be tougher and trying to show masculine characteristics. And I told her, no, we don't need. I don't need another Hugo. I need you. I need your skills. That's why you are hired. You know, you need your sensibility, your strength, your different way of thinking. And there is a famous saying that established that if we agree about everything, one of us is unnecessary. You know, so I need you bringing different opinion, different standing point, and fortunately she got it. But I guess that it was like triggered by this conversation I had with her, giving her psychological safety, if we can call this, to be herself. You know, so. But thank you for the answer, and I appreciate that we share this opinion, because I think we'll be much better if we give space for women being whoever they want to be, and others, you know, other kind of minorities. They can contribute a lot for all fields. Not only I'm talking about safe because this is my field, but they can contribute for everything, everywhere, being themselves.
Yeah, and I think that there's also an element of, you know, giving men space to have those attributes of gentleness and kindness, that, you know, men don't actually have to be hyper masculine either. You know, there's not just one type of man. And so allowing for that range of characteristics and attributes and behaviors and traits, recognizing that they do appear in both men and women, and that being okay.
Perfectly said. Yeah, yes, I missed this point, but of course, men also suffer a lot of pressure to be always tough, to be always firm, and to be, they don't cry, they don't have fragilities and everything, but everybody knows it's a completely lie. Also, I prefer to work in a place where you know, you can show your real emotions, you know, not hiding anything. So it's much better. And fortunately, I have this opportunity, but I know that some of my friends, unfortunately, doesn't have. But we work to create this kind of situation. Joelle, I appreciated so much our conversation. So I'm sorry for my light that failed, but I think the content is kept. And I want you to, as I always say, it's marketing time. Please give the viewers your contacts if you want, where they can find you, what kind of services you can provide for companies. Of course, most of the viewers are Brazilian, so but I have a lot of people that watch us from Australia, so feel free.
Yep, absolutely. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active there, and I'm always happy for new connections and to have a chat with people. You can follow our Psych, Health and Safety podcast as well. If you like what you heard me talking about there in terms of psychological health and safety and want to learn a bit more about how you can apply a risk management approach to that in the workplace, then that's a good place to start. And we've had lots of really impressive guests on in the episodes that we've had to date. So there's lots of great information on there.
We are looking forward. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Hugo.